welcome to any new members we have here. As you heard, we do this every month, last Thursday of the month, except of course at Thanksgiving time. As Ken said, it's always a week before the last Thursday. I particularly wanted to thank Bob Hilford, who filled in for me in my absence. I was away for 5 months. And Bob was kind enough to do a great job, and also Jerry Sweeney. Is Jerry here today? No. He's not here. Jerry actually introduced last week's speaker. If you were here, a gentleman by the name of Rafael Sierra spoke about the shortage of pilot training. Shortage of pilots. And so that was validated this week. I don't know if you guys saw the Wall Street Journal piece, which I have a copy here. Wall Street Journal ran a big front page piece that said, airlines face acute shortage of pilots. Now, I made copies of this piece. If you guys would like some, I have about 20 copies, so come and see me afterwards if you'd like to see it. It's actually a very interesting piece and very timely indeed. I wanted to say, introducing our speaker, that in the world of aviation, we most usually hear about pilots. These are the glamour boys, the boys that always are in the limelight. But of course, behind the scenes, there are many dedicated men and women who spend countless and tireless hours in innovating and discovering new ways to improve our air transportation system with safety innovations, of course, and new discoveries, as I say. This gentleman we're going to meet today is one of those people. They are really the unsung heroes of the world of aviation. We don't know how many lives they've saved. As you're going to see today, just one innovation basically has saved thousands of lives. So I'm very happy to have the man here in person, and so I expect you'll give him a big welcome, as you always do. Dr. John McCarthy is his name. He's sitting right here at the table. A little bit of his background. It's very extensive, so I called him last night and said, John, I can't read this whole thing. It's going to take an hour. So I said, do you mind if I just edit it back? So I will do that for you. He graduated with degrees in physics and meteorology, and later he went to get his PhD at the University of Chicago in the geophysical sciences. Like most well-educated men, he then went off and taught at the university for 4 years at the University of Oklahoma, where he taught meteorology, and and at the same time he did research at the National Service Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma. From 79 to 97, for the next 20 years, the major portion of his life, he worked for NCAR, which is the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. It was during this period that he worked on this project, which he's going to talk to you about today. It's impressive, and he was a protagonist in this development and successful implementation. Americans should know, and should know very proudly, that many of the things that are developed in this country are then adapted worldwide. So you're not just saving American lives, you're saving thousands of people worldwide, and that's something certainly to be proud of. He moved afterwards in 1997 to 2002 to the Naval Research Laboratory in Monterey, California. And there he worked on numerous programs, including a flight operations and risk assessment system, which is in place today. He's partly retired, he tells me, although it doesn't sound like it. He still consults to the FAA office, and he's also still consulting with the Navy. He's a licensed pilot. He's got his instrument rating, and he likes to fly gliders, as well as powered aeroplanes. And I must say that if you looked at the list of awards that he has received from people like Boeing and FAA, you'd be very impressed. So with a great deal of pleasure, I'd like to bring up John. Come on up, mate.
Pat, thank you very much for that great introduction and that 20-page bio. You did a good job of summarizing that very well. So, yes, I am a pilot, and another thing that I've done is I have about 250 flights in the jump seat of commercial air carriers, which allowed me to connect. Closer. Okay. Allowed me to connect meteorology, weather in the cockpit with my background. So it was a very good connection. I'm going to talk to you about the microburst. It is the key aspect of my life's work, and it's a very exciting story, and I hope you will enjoy hearing about it. The microburst is sort of like, unless you're a pilot, most people don't remember about microbursts. If you're young, you never heard of one because we haven't had a microburst accident in almost 20 years. We'll get into this in detail. So if you ask a young person about the microburst or the Beatles, they'll say, I don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, let's get into this, if this is going to work. My objective here is to provide a history of development and technology transfer to address low altitude wind shear as a hazard for aviation. And the second part of this, hello. There we go. I want to describe a very exciting part of how this all happened. It was a cross-cutting piece of work between pilots, scientists, engineers, aircraft manufacturers, airlines. We all got together and actually we locked people in a room, had them hang their institutional guns by the door, and we came up with cross-cutting solutions which were necessary and pretty unique, frankly, in how things happen. This is not doing it, so.
You got to point right at it.
Point, okay.
There's a wind shear.
Okay. You know, I'll tell you, in that time, a plane goes down in a microburst. The main players were Ted Fujita at the University of Chicago, who first discovered the event in looking at tornadoes. You have heard of the F scale, which stands for Fujita. He was an active player in starting this work. He passed on towards the end of the work. Myself, at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and a colleague, Jim Wilson, MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Boeing played a very big role in the project. One of the guys who I helped develop the wind shear training aid, which we'll get into in a lot of detail, was a guy named Alan Mullally. And you may have heard of him.
Yes, I have.
Alan was just an engineer in the Boeing commercial airplane at that time. He went on to become the head of the 777 program, and then became the CEO of Boeing, and now he's the CEO of the Ford Motor Company. So it's a very well-known Mullally. So people go in different directions. He's done extremely well. United Airlines, the FAA, of course, very involved and paid for it. NASA, some of you who've been involved in test flying may know Dick Gray or Jack Ehrenberger from Edwards, NASA Edwards, who played a prominent role in the work early on. And then Airline Pilots Association, Allied Pilots Association, Air Force, Navy, ATA, IATA, and ICAO all played roles in this work, so very broadly supported. It all started in June of 1975 when an Eastern Airlines jet was on approach to 22 left at JFK. And they encountered a thunderstorm, they encountered a downdraft which was not known at the time. This is analysis by Fujita, where the aircraft first encountered a headwind, a downdraft, and then a tailwind, all in about 23 seconds. Okay? The aircraft made a premature impact with terrain, went into the approach lights, and killed about 113 people, I believe, at the time. It's kind of a strange story, but there was a John McCarthy on that airplane who was killed. And in those days, they put the names of the people in the newspaper. The plane was a non-stop flight from New Orleans, which was my hometown, and my name appeared in the paper. And my parents received numerous phone calls saying, "Was John on the airplane?" Well, I wasn't. And but it did call my attention to this whole issue, and so I began to look at it. I was a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and began to look at it, primarily working with United flight simulators at Denver. Not at Denver. Well, we eventually went to Denver and did it, but it was a big beginning of this work. This is a artist's rendition of the microburst that hit Dallas-Fort Worth Airport on August 2nd, 19 5. And you can see that it was a pulsing microburst. It came down as a downdraft in a series of pulses that actually produces a vortex curl on the outside of the microburst, which adds all kinds of turbulence and nasties if you fly into it. And a Delta L-1011 flew into the aircraft on final approach and crashed, and was a major crash. The most serious crash to date was the crash of Eastern Flight 759 at New Orleans, which also played a role in my life in that particular accident. And 153 people were killed in that accident. So, just very simply, it's a downdraft and horizontal outflow. It's a very interesting phenomenon in that it's a pure divergence. That is, the air comes down, it spreads out. You can think about it as water coming out of your kitchen tap. It hits the basin, it spreads out. That's the water analogy. And the analogy in the air looks just like this. We'll talk about it more. But it takes you have about between 5 and 7 seconds to recognize you're in it. And you're in it for 25 seconds. Now that's not a long time. So it's a very small phenomenon when you think about it. It does not take a full thunderstorm to cause this. It can be in a much smaller storm, but it does require a downdraft. We found out early on that a Doppler radar, which we were using extensively for our research in thunderstorms and tornadoes, could provide an unambiguous, nearly 100% detection of a microburst. So this is a sequence of pictures, and I won't get too techy on you here. Let's see. Need 3 arms. Let's see how we do that. Right, the radar is over here. This is airflow towards the radar with the blue colors, and the brown colors are here away from the radar. So this location is an absolute location of a microburst. Nothing else in the atmosphere can produce this signal on top of the radar. If you rotate it 90 degrees and the flow is towards the radar here and away from the radar over here, it's a tornado. So that's what you can do with the Doppler radar. So this sequence, if you can make it move, aim it. That's the volume. Okay, just keep on going, put them all up there. Okay, that's good. So this thing, the interesting thing about it is it first forms here, and in about 10 minutes, it's already beginning to dissipate. So the thing that's interesting about a microburst is it is severe for about 5 minutes. So if you think about it, and it has to be in the vicinity of an airport for it to be dangerous to an aircraft. So the space-time window of hitting a microburst is very, very small. In fact, if you're a 121 pilot, the probability of experiencing a microburst is maybe 1 in your career, which is a huge training issue. Okay, you want to catch that? Okay. Okay, next. Okay, I'll just spend a second. This is a multiple Doppler analysis of the vertical structure of a microburst. In a thunderstorm, it produces a big downdraft and the outflow. And this actually occurred during a big project we did at Denver Airport. And one of my colleagues was on the airplane that came on the glide slope and landed right through it and had a very exciting time that they made. Next slide. Again, this is what happens to an airplane. If it goes up, it loses its performance. It doesn't really stall, per se. It just gets a very rapid descent towards terrain, and that's what happens. An example of a rather small thundercloud, not even a full thunderstorm, is a picture of many pictures that we saw. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the kind of interesting story. From 65 to 69, we had no microbursts. In this period, we had, this is the number of fatalities. We had 138 fatalities. They dropped to 112, 152, which covered DFW, and then it dropped to 134, and then dropped off to practically nothing. The last microburst accident was at Charlotte in 1994, and it killed 37 people. We'll get to the terminal Doppler weather radar. They had one ready to install there, but because of Indian artifacts at the site, it was on a hold, and so it was not installed. It's believed to be critical to the fact that they didn't get out of that one. And then, again, like I said, we haven't had we'll talk about these things. The wind shear research started in about 75 and extended to roughly 1994. Pilot training aid started here and still ongoing. Terminal Doppler weather radar and the low-level wind shear alert system are ongoing. So this is an example of how technology solved the problem. And we're pretty proud of it. We'll get into more of that. I'm sorry?
Justifiable.
Yeah. Next. These are the accidents. I've mentioned a number of them. The Eastern 66, the Continental. There was a Continental at Denver, which had a breakup of the aircraft and no injuries. Allegheny had a couple of injuries. In Philadelphia, Eastern, another example of a non-fatal accident. Pan Am, the most fatal, and the second most fatal was Delta 191. And there's some interesting stories about, I could tell, but I won't. And then the Charlotte accident. Next slide. So we decided to do a project called the Joint Airport Weather Studies, called JAWS. And this project was done at Denver Stapleton Airport in 1992. Next slide. This was sponsored, it was run by the National Center for Atmospheric Research, but it had a lot of people involved in the work. We had 3 Doppler radars, one here, one here out northeast of Denver, and one at Stapleton. And by using 3 Dopplers, we could reconstruct a 3-dimensional picture of microbursts. We had hoped to get a number of microbursts indicated in the study. We got 93 in 3 months. So we found that they were pretty frequent. And we had a lot of other instruments. We had a total of 5 aircraft. This was a total go after it kind of project. On June 7th, July 7th, Eastern crashed in New Orleans, and it brought a whole lot of attention to this project. And a very memorable day. I remember driving home that day. We had no weather that day at Denver, and I heard on the radio about this crash, and I said, oh my God, our life will never be the same again, because we were out there doing it. Next slide. Here's a 3-dimensional reconstruction of low altitude winds, and you can see the divergence here, out this way, and out this way, out the north, and a little bit out of the south. Of course, in real world, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but you don't want to fly into it. Again, here's an example of how it hits the ground and spreads out horizontally, and after 10 minutes, the distance across the microburst is so large that the acceleration capabilities of the aircraft can handle it. It's only when the distance is only 1 or 2 miles that you have a big problem. Let's see, here's a vertical picture from the same example of what it looks like in vertical. So this is real data. Incidentally, this is the data set that has been used in simulators worldwide to produce a microburst flow in pilot training. So if you're a pilot and you go get a wind shear, this is the one that it's the best one we came up with during the JAWS project. Am I doing okay volume-wise?
Sure.
I swallow this thing. Next slide. Okay, there's a picture of a vortex curl on the leading edge of a microburst at Denver. Is blowing dust. We And this is what a microburst looked like outside of looking out of the tower at Old Denver at Stapleton Airport, and you can see the outflow in both directions. We use pictures like this in the wind shear training aid to give pilots an indication of what a microburst would look like. This is an arid area. For example, in New Orleans, it would be flailing trees or flying alligators. Next slide. Profiles that Boeing simulated a normal takeoff, a takeoff into a microburst with a premature impact with terrain, a worse one, and one where the airplane comes back down to the ground or near the ground and then gets out by flying out the backside of the microburst. This is the profile of the Pan Am accident on a takeoff from New Orleans, except the aircraft hit treetops right here and didn't make it. So it was a very close call, but it was the most fatal accident, killed 6 people on the ground as well. Next slide. So, of course, what does Congress do? In fact, I had something to do with this. The senator from Louisiana, I can't think of his name now, John Breaux may have been, I'm not sure his name now, called me and he said, what do we need to do, Dr. McCarthy? And I said, you need to create a blue ribbon National Academy of Science committee to look at all aspects of wind shear. And he did. And so there were 2 committees, one more scientific oriented and the other one more engineering oriented. And the committees met for about a year and produced a report. And it was pretty interesting. Let's see. Hit the button, please. I'm tapping my foot. There was a need for something we did not have, which was an integrated wind shear program where it all fit together, including education and training. Training, if you don't know this, is the hardest thing to get done in our field. Training is always the first thing to drop off of a budget, which is really sad. That was not the case in this program. Wind shear education, improved pilot, controller communications, as a long story, but everything here is a long story, and develop a complete detection system for microbursts. The communication is in almost every accident. Somebody experienced wind shear ahead of the aircraft that crashed and never reported it. So that's a big problem. It's not always the case, but it has happened enough times that it's a big issue. We also improved the low-level wind shear alert system. This is Denver. We went from 6 stations to, I believe, 15 stations in total. This is a 100-knot loss on approach to runway 17 left. A Continental jet got a warning from this alert and executed a missed approach and received a whole award chain from Continental pilot down through NCAR, all the people who developed the technology received award from Aviation and Space Technology for this event. Next slide. The Doppler radar, it's about a 20-foot dish inside of a dome. The whole country is covered by this radar called NexRad. There are equivalent to 75 such radars located at the major airports in the United States and a few overseas that detect microbursts. I'm doing good. Okay. Next slide. It produces a situation display of where the storm is and where the microbursts are in red with respect to the runways, and then it produces a warning that may say microburst alert on 26, but in this case it's calm, but let's see, I'm not sure that's the right display, but it shows the actual wind speeds. Here is a 70-knot loss on the runway, a 35-knot loss, 3 miles final, and so on. And the controller sees that display and transmits that information to the pilot, either getting ready to take off or approaching land. So that's how that warning is produced to the flight crew. Next slide. That's okay. That is just a follow-up of the same thing. It shows what it looks like. Next picture. this obviously became an important part of an integrated wind shear system, and it also used the low-level wind shear alert system to produce the integrated terminal weather system, which is located at 75 airports in the United States. Actually, it's a detail, but we'll go through that. But 75 airports are covered. Next slide. And these are the places that have a wind shear detector. It goes up the West Coast, it goes to the Intermountain region, and then it's heavily weighted towards thunderstorms, so the eastern two-thirds of the United States.
Sure.
And we also were involved in producing a wind shear and turbulence detection system for the new Hong Kong airport, which is now operational and very functional in Hong Kong. So we were involved in the development of this system. So let's see here. I think the biggest thing we did was the wind shear training aid. It has turned out to be the most important thing. FAA, Boeing, Lockheed, Douglas, United, and Aviation Weather Associates, which is really a mom and pop company, of which I'm the technical person and my wife is the accountant. Next slide. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about it. Just go ahead and scroll it down to the bottom because it's easy to look at. Okay. All right. The first thing we tell pilots worldwide, it's now an IATA, ICAO required system, the FAA requires it, is avoid, avoid, avoid. You don't want to go there by any means possible. Detection system, we'll look at some other detection systems in a minute, or recognize conditions, we'll look at some other reasons to detect. Recognition is difficult. Time for recognition is 5 to 15 seconds. Effective crew coordination is essential to get through a wind shear. We're looking carefully at the flight instruments, and we'll look at that in a second. Flight path must be controlled with pitch, attitude, and unusual stick forces may be experienced. And reduced airspeed is required. And what that means is, if you get into a downdraft and tailwind, you need to trade airspeed for altitude. And that means you may get stick shaker for a period of time, but it may be the only way you can get out of it. Just to make your day, the strongest microburst we have ever seen has been a 220 knot differential at, of all places, the President's Airport, the airport in Washington, Andrews Air Force Base. I can tell you some horror stories about that one, but President Reagan had just landed and had taxied to the ramp when this thing hit, and the plane was dancing all over the place. They put him under the desk, but everything was okay. There was a lot of damage on the field. Next slide. Okay, so what do? You look at your flight instruments, and assuming you're on the stabilized approach. If you're not in the stabilized approach, this doesn't work. A plus or minus 15 knot change, greater than that, of indicated airspeed is a problem. A plus or minus 500 feet per minute vertical speed change is a problem. And a plus or minus 5 knot pitch attitude is a problem. And on approach, glide slope, unusual throttle position for a significant amount of time is a way to say something is not right. And the recommendation here is to get out. Get out. Make a no configuration change, exit from the situation. Next slide. So the pilot was supposed to be looking for any signs of wind shear. No, continue standard operating procedure. Yes. Ask the question, is it safe to continue? A decision, no, to avoid. Yes, continue with precautions. You may add some speed if you think it's a minor situation and no other warning has been given to you. And the big thing is absolutely get on the microphone and report the encounter, because you may very well save somebody else's life. The reason for that is if it's just the beginning of a microburst, the next plane in line 2 minutes behind you may get the microburst in a much stronger condition. Next slide. Okay, the wind shear training aid is required by FARs in the United States after 1991. It became part of ICAO requirements. It's essentially required of all airlines who are 121 or equivalent in the world. It's also been adapted in a contract by Flight Safety International for high-end GA, Flight Safety International and Flight Safety Foundation. And there's been relatively little work for the small NGA because it's believed that wind shear, microburst wind shear, is not a particular hazard because of the very rapid response of the aircraft when it encounters the event. There may be something else that will get you in the same situation, but the wind shear itself is not considered to be super critical. I'm not convinced of that personally, being a private pilot. I haven't flown for one, so. Next slide. Okay, there is an airborne wind shear system. It's an in-situ reactive system that's been implemented and mandated, and that simply looks at these deviations from normal and produces a wind shear warning, and it uses the aircraft as a sensor. Okay, and that's available on every aircraft today for all practical purposes. Wind shear recovery and guidance has been, I think, pretty much back-fitted for all 21, and it's certainly available on all new aircraft. And there is a generation of airborne forward-look predictive radar that's available. And the next slide shows a little bit of how that works. It's your normal radar in a wind shear mode, and it looks out, say, 3 miles. This is the flight path, and then this is either side of the flight path. And red means it's a warning area, yellow is a caution area, and anything out here is considered advisory. And this is an Airbus feature. Many aircraft have been retrofitted to this. All new aircraft, I believe, has this capability. Next slide. So how did we do? Well, I can tell you, I wouldn't be standing here. We did a lousy job. We had a goal of decreasing the frequency of domestic wind shear accidents from about 1 every 1 to 2 years to 1 to every 20 years, and we haven't had one since 1994. 0. The jury's out. It'll always be out. Unfortunately, there probably will be another accident someday. So it's very successful. Next slide. And I'll show the same slide again to show what we did. Next slide. Conclusions. In every National Academy recommendation was addressed. And there's a great story. Because the guy who did this is Admiral Don Beeman of the FAA, the administrator, who was one of the great super gems left. He died in driver accidents. With that, I can tell you some strange stories. And the objective in reducing accidents has met with outstanding success. Next slide. This is a figure way too complicated for you to hear, because it takes too long to understand it. But this is the decrease in the number of accidents over time. And this is an estimate of which systems produce the greatest change. And the wind shear training aid is considered to have the largest impact. Why? It goes everywhere. It's the pilot who does this. Airplane reactive systems assist, terminal Doppler weather radar assists, and then the predictive systems which work about a 50-50 probability. And I guess my last slide is, to me, a very exciting slide. What we did is that we combined industry and government working together. It happens. It really can happen. It did in this case. Define problems and interventions, prioritize and develop a plan, and implement the plan. The big job was networking. How did we get all of these people working together? Actually, my job was the network. That's the job that I did most. I guess the last thing I'd say in closing is it's a rare moment that a scientist, and also a pilot, can say we can identify a hazard, put our arms around it, and make it go away, and all in the course of 10 or 15 years. And so it was a very exciting opportunity, and I feel like we did a great thing. I thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, I just want to say thank you. I'm 31 years with American Airlines, retired captain, 11 years as a check airman. I was in DFW ops the day the Delta went down, put a whole chill through the whole flight ops area. Thank you very much for your efforts and your work on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's kind of timely what your timeline there, because I was making an approach into Denver in the 727 landing west on a perfectly clear day in 1979. And we got into one of those and didn't know what it was, and we ended up landing short on the overrun. And two flights ahead of us, come to find out, had the same problem, but not as bad, never said a word. And we ended up ruining the tires and having to do a hard landing check and a few other things. But it was quite an experience. It turned out to be over in Golden, Colorado. There was a little thunderstorm over there.
Yep.
And I don't know how many miles that is, but it's at least 10, 15 miles away.
Right.
And
Well, it could have come out of an overhang too. It could have easily have come out of an overhang. If the storm was west of you, which is Golden, there could have been a thick anvil which produced a rain shower which evaporated before reaching the ground and produced a cold downdraft. The things I haven't talked about, but the downdraft.
Microphone.
The downdraft is produced by evaporative cooling, and when it hits the ground, it spreads out. You don't have to have any rain anywhere in sight to have it happen.
Well, it was quite an experience, I'll tell you.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm very glad you could come to breakfast. Yes.
The illustrations that you showed for the microbursts showed them in largely clear air. Do they occur in an embedded environment?
They occur in three environments. A very light thunderstorm, or certainly not even a thunderstorm, just a big cumulocongestus that produces some precipitation. People often say a Virga type rain not reaching the ground, but the downdraft does. In a thunderstorm, a standard pop-up, popcorn cell thunderstorm common. That was the case in DFW, for example, and in New Orleans. And then in a big, severe thunderstorm, and that's what happened in Andrews Air Force Base. So a big storm, which they should never have been in the first place. Okay, any more? Yes, sir.
On Eastern Flight 66 JFK, I was an Eastern pilot. I was in the parking lot when that aircraft hit and blew. We not only lost the captain, co-pilot, flight engineer, several flight attendants, the captain's son was on the jump seat. He too was killed. I was taken off my trip, reported to the ALPA Safety Accident Investigation Team. I was, at that time, a member. And we started going through the process of trying to figure out what happened to the 727. And it was deemed as a CFIT, control flight into terrain. And as Dr. McCarthy so wonderfully explained, that was not a controlled flight into terrain. That led us to going into the simulators, and I was checking out the 1011, but I was also involved in the Dallas 1011 accident review. And we tried to replicate exactly what happened to Eastern Flight 66. We couldn't. We didn't have enough knowledge. We spent 5 working days trying to replicate that flight. And had it not been for Dr. McCarthy and his colleagues, we probably never would have figured out what happened to that awful, awful accident, Eastern Flight 66. As far as the Dallas L-1011 flight crash, that, as you and I know, involves some pilot crew situations. And we started to get into the review of that. And again, had it not been for Dr. McCarthy and his colleagues, we probably would not have had a clue, because the black box in both the Eastern 66 and the Dallas flight didn't give us enough indicative cognitive information to figure out what happened. And had it not been for you, sir, and your colleagues, we probably would have been clueless to this day. God bless you. Thank you so much.
I was flying 727, 1989 into Hobby when I got the, we decided to go around. The first officer was flying, and I said, I don't like the looks of this. Southwest had just gone in, we were inside a marker, had landing flaps geared down. And I said, I don't like the button, so we're pushing the throttles up when the guidance came up. And we just left it, you know, the same configuration. And we lost about 400 feet with clink power and got out of it. I thank you. Otherwise, I may not.
Well, I mean, I think for a number of people would be, I didn't know it's, we wouldn't have had a full count this morning. It's really a good thing. So it's very rewarding to, I've never spoken to a group just like this, where people have been around and flying for many, many years. And it's very rewarding to hear that it worked. You know it worked in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the experience, it's very good. We're okay?
You said that you were kind of in disagreement with the theory that it wasn't a big effect for small GA airplanes. I kind of share your opinion, but I'm curious as to why you're in this argument.
I don't have great body of evidence. I think when I flew a small airplane, I was never anywhere close to something that would likely reduce a microburst. That's number one, because I was, you know, I didn't want to be a bold pilot. The second thing is when you go from max power in a Cessna 210, you have it right there. And that's not the case in flights like an older jet, like a 727 or 727 stretch.
We know that well.
The lift to thrust ratio is actually higher in a small airplane. So you can get through it, and also your time of passage is much longer than it is in a jet, so that the impact of the delta V, so to speak, on the airspeed is much longer, and your accelerations are able to handle it. That's what I think.
I've been in a couple of small airplanes, and you get, you know, full power and put it up there, you're still coming down pretty quickly. And so I kind of agree with you, it can be an effect even on small.
I wish there was more work done on that, but it hasn't been. Okay.
You had a chart that showed a vertical scale, and I couldn't read that scale. So what's from ground level up to how high does this occur?
Okay. Well, the downdraft is coming typically from a substantial altitude, a few kilometers up. We believe that a microburst is not dangerous above 1,000 feet because it's still a downdraft, and it hasn't converted to a headwind tailwind component, which in terms of performance is more serious than the downdraft by itself. So if you go through, and I've flown through a lot of microbursts in a no, not but in NASA jet. I can't think of the model, but what? No. It was a twin-engine jet, standard jet. It was ranging on. It was like a 737, old. The original 737 is the only thing NASA could afford to have. And when you fly through it at 6,000 feet, it's a bump. You know, it's a bump. You feel it. But if you fly through it at 1,000 feet or 600 feet, which we did, we made the pilot real jumpy. You know, we got some real downdrafts on it. But we were intentionally flying through, measuring the system on an onboard radar before the radar. And the search. We had plenty of airspeed.
make another, back in 1862, I was involved with a Northwest Airlines 720B that took out of Miami and got caught in a thunderstorm. It wasn't a microburst, but anyway, they lost control and killed everybody. And we helped rebuild the airplane at the Opelika Airport. And out of that, a Northwest meteorologist, I think his name was Sauerwurst or something like that.
Dan Sova is a world famous.
Right. We came up with this program that we always did with the airlines for years on how to fly out of a, at that time it wasn't a microburst, it was just if you got caught in a thunderstorm, how to run into the stick shaker and eventually fly out of it. Well, that went on, and we did that for years and years and years at our, every 6 months when we went to the simulator. Then they went to once a year. Then they went to once every 2 years we talked about it. Well, then we have this Air France fiasco a couple of years ago off of Brazil, and these guys didn't have a clue what we'd learned 30 years, 40 years before. So when you were talking about communications, this is something that I'm afraid if it happens, nothing happens for a few years, it's going to lose interest.
Right. Well, first of all, I knew Dan Sola very well, and I consider him one of my mentors. And I think Northwest meteorology led the way, and still is in many respects. The second thing I'll mention is I worked Air France 447 pretty hard, and there is a lot of weather in that case. And then, as you say, there's a lot of flight crew coordination things that totally failed. The other thing about that flight is it's so automated. All the automation failed, basically, on that airplane. And it's just a real combination mess is what that is. And I wonder when Air France is going to really come to grips with total automation.
But, you know, the main theme that we had back in '62, and I think even today, and maybe even on Air France, is the attitude indicator is the only one that really tells you the truth of what's happening in an upset like they have.
Right. Or something they don't have, which is
Right.
an angle of attack indicator.
Right.
If you ask any military pilot, and they'll say, whoa, you couldn't go anywhere near this stuff with AOA. But that's a long discussion. I'm told that we're, so thank you very much.
You know, we're going to get into this, gentlemen, even if we're not pilots, because we are passengers, so we are grateful for what you've done. We have a poster in the back. We'd like to ask you all to sign your names on there.